Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Welcome. We will just give a few minutes and we'll start shortly. Before we begin, I just want to thank Carlos González Villar, MD Regional Head of Global Liquidity and Cash Management in LATAM from HSBC, Mauricio Benavides, CEO and co-founder of Metabase Q, Maria Jose Lince, Head of Security as a Service from Metabase Q, and our two keynote speakers of this model, Matt Cranning and Richard Thompson. Thank you so much for joining. And everyone, if you can just give us one more minute, then we will be starting our first session. We are ready. Thank you everyone for joining us. Mao, the floor is yours.
Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have everybody joining this panel. As we celebrate the Cybersecurity Awareness Month during October, we kicked off with the second edition of this unmatched cybersecurity executive program, Cybersecurity for Leaders, Building a Resilient Organization. The partnership between Metabase Q and HSBC, based in the belief of always being a step ahead and transforming Latin America as the world and with their people, values technology and knowledge, has thought and prepared for this program that will enable you and your organization to become a cyber resilient in the near and long-term future. Every aspect of business today has a cybersecurity component. Every business relationship, product, hiring decision and marketing program, every customer interaction, every communication, product design, and every executive decision now has a part of cybersecurity in it. It is hard-pressed to come up with a single business activity that is not in some vital way connected to a computer or a computer network, and therefore to cybersecurity. Yet, in far too many cases, we think of cybersecurity as a necessary evil. But cybersecurity can and should be about driving revenue, achieving greater profitability, attracting and retaining new customers, operating much more efficient, empowering innovation, hiring the best people, and transforming the workplace into the best place to work. Only when we think of cybersecurity in those terms can we truly leverage it as part of the future of innovation. Security should only be an enabler of business, not a detriment. The new challenges ahead, enhanced by the COVID pandemic and the acceleration of the hybrid work model that has already started, will be best addressed if we are able to understand and face the current cyber threats, cyber attacks, and learn about the available solutions to protect our companies and our people in this new world of remote and distributed work. According to PurpleSec, cybercrime as a whole has increased by 600% since the beginning of the global pandemic. This has resulted in billions of dollars of losses to companies and organizations, and Latin America today is especially vulnerable. For this reason, we have prepared an exclusive and educational program in which you will receive direct access and mentorship from the leading and most brilliant minds on today's cybersecurity, as well as developers of the most advanced technologies on the market, researchers, and global experts in the field. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us again in this second edition. It is great to have you here. And of course, Rich, thank you again. And thank you for your support of being part of this incredible event. We are honored to have you both in this module. Maria Jose, it is exciting for us, for you to be also participating in this amazing model with these two amazing speakers. We are confident that the effort and commitment gathered during the next 4 weeks will result in stronger and safer companies, so we're better prepared for what the future is coming. We hope you enjoy and benefit every minute of this remarkable program designed for the future of organization and of Latin America. Once again, thank you for joining us and for choosing to start this journey that will turn you into a security conscious leader, which this world needs today. With this said, I will give the floor to Carlos, Regional Head of Global Liquidity and Cash Management for Latin America on HSBC. Gracias, Carlos. It is an honor to put this together with you and the HSBC team across Latin America, and to see how we can start just a conversation and make sure that the region is safer. Go ahead, Carlos.
Thank you, Mauricio, and good morning, everyone. A privilege to be here today and an honor to be sponsoring this fantastic program, the leading cyber security educational program in LATAM, where we have been lucky to attract, as you mentioned, some of the biggest experts in the field globally. So we are proud to bring this for our customers, for our partners and friends, to make sure that we update them in what is very important, to be aware of what are the threats we are facing nowadays around cybersecurity, which is present and should be present in all of our activities and in our ecosystems. The objective of this program will be to make sure that everyone will end up being better aware on mechanisms to maximize the usage of technology in a protected way. So we are very happy to see the incredible themes and speakers that we will have along the next few weeks in the different sessions. And we are very thankful for your assistance. Thank you and enjoy the program. And with this, I'll pass it over to you, Maria Jose, to kick off with the panel of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Good morning and welcome to our module number 1. We will start talking about cybersecurity. And well, Richard, Matt, we're going to start with this approach of cybersecurity. And we'll start with the basic question. What is cybersecurity and why is it important to talk about nowadays about cybersecurity?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'm Matt Craning, the CTO of Cortex at Palo Alto Networks. I think a lot of people will debate endlessly the definitions, but at Palo Alto Networks, we define cybersecurity as protecting effectively data, infrastructure, assets, and people from unauthorized access to those systems. And that becomes very wide and encompassing, but it's kind of the, I would say, shorthand. It's really identifying kind of core critical systems and then understanding how access, including unauthorized access to those systems, can proliferate across your networks and building a strategy across people's process and technology to prevent that. So we'll be unpacking a lot of that today, but I think the main trends, especially over the last 10 to 20 years, are that effectively almost any form of value creation touches a digital system that is networked. and that the main changes that we've seen are that it's very hard to only look at kind of part of your network or think that things are disconnected. So even if you want to protect only a small number of things, the proliferation of how network systems are and just how many there are has made the challenges very, very different than they were even 10 or 20 years ago, where even if you had a relatively small number of things that you wanted to protect, in the past, you only had to look at a relatively small number of things. Today, what's actually happened with the paradigm is even if you have a relatively small number of things or a relatively small number of kind of concepts that you really care about protecting, you actually have to look much wider and much broader, simply because there's so many more access points to them.
So good morning, my name is Rich Thompson. I am also honored to be with you today. I have Matt has eloquently described those issues of cybersecurity. I think the only thing I would add to that is that we're in a very, very unique time, right? Many don't usually get the opportunity to acknowledge that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. And this industrial revolution has taken the form of internet connected or connected networked systems. In the past, to protect your business, your organization, you worried more about internal and external threats of a physical nature. You talked about your facilities. You talked about how you were going to protect those from both fire and weather and theft and folks breaking in. And never before, other than maybe with commodities trading, were there threats to the entire organization that can happen wide scale across the board. Okay, completely direct from the outside that does not require physical existence of the person at the organization, right? And the volume and the magnitude that through those threats or those security risks take on an organization. They have become tenfold, if not 100-fold more impactful. They can be more damaging to brand awareness. They can take large portions of your business, whether it's customer data, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's just gaining advantage in a contractual situation, right? All of this is stored digitally in organizations. They are stored in computers that are networked, and they are stored in networks that have, or for the most part, there is some sort of ingress point from the cyber perspective, basically from the internet. So it is a very, very unique time. It has, as Matt said, 20, 30 years ago, we didn't think about cybersecurity the way we think about it today, but we also didn't have the level and the expertise of attackers that we have today. Whether it's, what I would call a script kiddie or somebody just using ransomware to, steal a few things or get some Bitcoin from you, or they use that ransomware to set the dumpster on fire as they run out the back of the building with all of your stuff. Nation state attackers and large scale efforts. So it is certainly unique, and it'll be interesting to explore the rest of this today.
Thank you,
Great.
Rich. Matt, now within this backdrop, how does an organization should understand cybersecurity, and is there a basic roadmap an organization can follow?
So I think one is the basic roadmaps will change, obviously, based on kind of size, importance, and targetability. If you're a bank with tens of thousands of employees, it's going to be different than if you are a retail shop with a dozen stores, both in terms of level of spend and also level of targetability. I think the two things that we would say on this are one, and this will kind of go into pitfalls, but we see it all the time with our customers. One is you need to start kind of a roadmap starts with an end-to-end view. It's not kind of a tacked on strategy where you go kind of drip. You add one product or one vendor at a time. You try to patch things. You want to have kind of an end-to-end view of what you're trying to protect. You need to have opinions and policies about what you actually want to protect. There's an old saying, if everything is important, then nothing is. So a lot of this starts with an articulation of the kind of core things that you want to protect. So as an example of that, for a bank, it would be things like, obviously, the confidentiality of customer data would be one that would be kind of very, very up there as a thing that you are willing and want to protect. And from that, you actually build out an end-to-end strategy and roadmap. And I think the key thing to understand about all these is no single vendor. Richard and I will never make this promise from our companies, but you should always be aware of them. No single vendor can actually provide you with a full suite of every single part of your cybersecurity need, which is why you can actually work with places like Metabase and other integrators to say, how do I actually come up with a strategy? How do we get best-in-class vendors in places, but to address our specific needs? And I think that's the real key. If people are expecting kind of one thing out of the box to solve all of their problems, they'll be very readily sold something that will claim that. But the thing that we'll say first and foremost is that, I now work at the largest cybersecurity company in the world. We do not do that. No one in the world can do that holistically. So it actually is a process. It's an important one. And that's why it actually, for a session like this, it's the responsibility of senior leadership going all the way up to the board and governance to actually be able to understand and articulate, what do we want to prevent first? And when I talk with customers, it's amazing how many actually don't have that. Even Fortune 500 companies in America, that's actually where I start with the roadmap, is like understanding what you actually want to protect. And then from that, working with partners to define what the roadmap is. And from that process, a number of kind of great patterns will show up. But if you don't have those goals to start, you can spend a lot of money on things from a lot of people that will tell you they're making you more secure, but you won't actually have a strategy.
Yep, I completely agree with that. And it's funny, Matt, that you bring that up. The industry has spent billions of dollars, right? Billions and billions of dollars on either technology, people, or educating and investing and training people, okay? As each one of those, we've spent billions over the last few years or last decades, we still get, household name companies that are in the news because their walls have been breached, that people have taken things, they've shut down. I mean, one example last year, an entire pipeline in the United States was taken down within minutes, the entire eastern seaboard of the US. They spent millions of dollars on their security system, right? There's no possible way to do that. Matt is absolutely correct. There's no one solution that fits it all. And as senior leadership, sometimes that's difficult, right? As Matt would say, some vendors will sell you anything, okay? The idea of defense in depth is super important, because defense in depth doesn't just go to the multiple layers of an onion that you have multiple fences or gates involved in your program. That also includes defense in depth from a vendor perspective, right? If you put all your cards in one basket and you allow one vendor to run all of your security, a single flaw in that vendor exposes your entire stack. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind. And certainly as we holistically look at what you need to protect, it starts with how do you, what assets do you have? What is the value of each one of those assets? And assets is not just machines, right? They're people, they're goods and services, they're trucks, they're all kinds of things in your organization that you need to be able to protect. And you got to be able to not only identify each one of those, but also place a value of which is most important, right? Because you can't fix it all at one time. You're gonna have to do it little bits at a time and go for the most important stuff.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And talking about strategy, and besides these mistake of looking for just one vendor, which other weaknesses or mistakes do you see when companies are creating their cybersecurity strategy?
So I'll jump in real quick. One thing that I see is that, I guess what I would love to impress upon everybody that it's the whole the metaphor of the weakest link is how they will get past and get in. And while you cannot fix everything, and you will have weaklings, you will have things that fall through the cracks, it does start with good discipline, good due diligence up front, verifying that your controls are in place the way that you set them. Okay. We've all known, if all of us security professionals here, we've all been in positions where someone asked us, did everything get patched? And we run around as security professionals and we do all these reports to say, hey, did everything get patched? And we always come up with the same thing. 90 to 95% of the stuff got patched or updated, and the other 5% didn't. And we're constantly then chasing those other 5%, which is important, right? But sometimes we're also missing the most important factor in what risk that actually brings to us, right? And the weakest link, right? It could be, did you patch all your machines? Do you even know where all your machines are at? Where are all your humans at? How many machines do your humans actually use? So this is really important from the COVID perspective. We moved, over 18 months ago, we've had to move almost all of our employees out of our buildings into their homes, right? And especially companies that are heavily SaaS-based or cloud-based application-based. How do they know? How do you know that your users are actually using the devices that you sanctioned, right? If they can log into a cloud application, if they can do that from virtually any device, which is okay, as long as security protocols are in place. But then the question comes up, where is your data sitting? Is it on your computer? Is it on someone else's computer? Is it on, one of the children's computers? There's a lot to think about, but it is the notion of the weakest link. You've got to be able to protect the most vulnerable assets first, but you need a wide range picture of the environment.
Okay, anything to add, Matt?
I think that's exactly correct. There are two things that come with that. So there's a difference between where you think your weakest links are and where your weakest links actually are. And it is subtle, but actually in a lot of cases, that's actually the game. And a lot of this goes to, can you answer basic questions well, easily? So when I talk with a number of leaders, again, everyone will have these vast risks matrices and spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and they'll say, oh, we do all these things. And then I ask, that's great. Like, does this cover every single risk vector in your organization? Like, no, this maybe covers 60% of our assets. Okay, so you're spending 100% of your time on the 60% of the things that you know the most about. But that doesn't mean that they're actually the best point to be spending your time. And when we kind of come in and advise clients, first and foremost, and this is used in all security frameworks, I joke that the NIST framework says very upfront, it has about 28 words on, you should have kind of a notion of end-to-end visibility and a notion of assets and inventory. They'll then have 60 pages on how to do things like crypto key rotation and other very sophisticated technical objects, and they'll have one line of, you should know the things you need to protect. And when we come in and we see this, usually the weakest links come from not doing the basics, not even well, just decently, but holistically across an organization. And that's actually where people come in. And there's a lot of cases, especially more recently with ransomware, where the attack vector used to be thought of as everything is phishing. Everything is kind of a person clicking on that. And there are lots of phishing vendors that spend over $1 billion in marketing to readily confirm this fact in everyone's mind. And it's not that that's wrong. You should have phishing protection, but email's comparatively simple. It actually comes through one place, your own mail servers. You know to inspect every message there. So you should have a good vendor for that. But at the same time, a lot of the other challenges are you don't actually know the state of everything else. And it adds this kind of extra level of, you need to have both kind of an end-to-end view to try to discover everything that you have and know its state. And that, as Richard was saying, it's usually about, oh, we patched 90% of our systems. That's sometimes the ones you know about. So what we've found is that when something happens, the best organizations actually have the capability to call up, rather automatically, here's almost everything I have. Here's the state it's in. It's never going to be perfect. Here's our program to do something. And then they can then start to apply great security controls to that, because then all of a sudden they say, wait, the only things that are allowed to, directly access any crown jewels of ours are actually known systems. Now all of a sudden that gives you a really great security guarantee. It says the only things that can access my most important things have to be known to me. And then that's great, because you can then actually start to apply other policies on top of that. You can say, wait, if it's only known things, they have to be known and in a good state in order to access this. And this is how you start to build a more robust security program. The problems with security come from the fact that often it can be what I call it's an airbag that works except when you're in a car accident. You have all these great systems, you have all of these great policies, and then you create all these exceptions. And people will leave, and then all of a sudden, you don't actually know what security controls you have. You don't actually know what you have, which happens very regularly. That's actually some of the most kind of important recommendations we make. Or you actually have to have things uniformly enforced. You have to think end to end. You have to actually enforce these things, because most organizations don't, and then they'll have a bad day kind of silently, which is very unfortunate and very bad for them.
Okay, well, you have been mentioning quite relevant things and themes, and perhaps would be good if we could emphasize around what would be your most important recommendations for the organizations to evolve and stay up to date with their cybersecurity programs, as attackers are constantly evolving and improving their attacks. So perhaps good time to emphasize your recommendations for all of the companies attending the event.
So I'll start. I think the largest gap that we see in the market is actually have a commitment, and it's not one single piece of technology, that there are some emerging ones that begin to cover this, of how do you actually have asset and inventory effectively of users, of infrastructure, so IT assets, and then eventually of data. Data is the very sophisticated one. It's a nice one to say. I don't think that anyone has a kind of even close to a complete solution for any enterprise at scale right now, but that actually have a plan to understand assets and inventory. And if you have that, amazing things become possible, because then all of a sudden, all of your other security investments get effectively improved by being able to go over everything. But the most common problem that we see in organizations is that they will have very good kind of isolated tools and silos in places, but they don't actually cover the full estate. So where this then becomes a problem is anytime they want to run any kind of process and have it be effective, they cannot actually bring automation to bear. So they'll have all these great different tools, but then all of a sudden to actually say, there was a new vulnerability in Cisco routers. How many Cisco routers do we have? What state are they in? Are we going to patch them? Is an enormously expensive proposition for people. And it's that lack of investment in kind of assets and inventory and understanding them, again, across users, across infrastructure, and eventually across data, that actually leads us to this problem of we have kind of a digital sounding way that we do security, but the dirty little secret is it's done by massive amounts of people in most security operations centers, because we don't actually have these systems tied together in order to do automation. And that the most important recommendations I have are, one, actually have kind of a strategy around how you're going to really do automation. And that has a number of components. And I think the most important bullet within that is, how do you actually do things holistically across assets and inventory? Because if you do that, that frees up so much more of people's time to do mundane things that should be done by computers, to actually do more sophisticated things like hunting very advanced threats that actually require human activity, but are effectively given short shrift because we're now having to have people spend most of their time on low level, less valuable activities.
Okay, I think I would jump in. One of my most important, I guess, advice or considerations I would give is encourage your teams to work together. And I know that sounds easy, right? IT operations and IT security don't particularly go hand in hand, right? But yet both groups have the exact same problem. When a new service, device, human, whatever, component of the network, any sort of that structure comes up, they have an app for that. And every single one of those users, whether or admins, whether it's IT operations or IT security, have something that either has an application that either machines go through, right? Machines use and are managed by those three services. Okay. And one of the things that computers do really, really well, and applications in our environment do really, really well, is log and record data. The problem is we don't use all that data to our advance, right? We don't use IT security and IT operations traditionally don't merge their data together. They traditionally don't work sometimes in the same organization, okay? Depending on where that report is. They're not encouraged to share information. And here's one thing I'll probably one piece of evidence, right? Many times organizations now have a mobile strategy, right? And phones have been introduced in the last 10, 20 years into the organization. And yet the folks that run like the MDM or the mobile device management service, or the folks that run the mobility service, are typically in telecommunications. And they're not in IT security or IT operations, or they're a subset of IT operations. But very few amount of times do a security team actually know the patching level, the threats, and the devices that have been issued to our users, right? But yet the security department needs to be able to make sure they're up to date, they're secure, and everything else. So from what Matt was saying is absolutely true. Number one, where is your machines? Do you have them all? There is no, unfortunately, or fortunately, there is no single source of truth. This is the hardest part. If you ask an admin to your network, let's say Active Directory, right? The Active Directory admin, they're going to believe that their management system is the source of truth because they have to authenticate. They have to hand out profiles and authorize permissions to network devices. You know, your network gear itself, those admins are going to say, well, we have the source of truth because all the devices have to come through us to go in and out the various networks and domains and out to the internet. Your security teams, their job is really super important to protect all the devices, and they're going to believe that their machines are the source of truth. When in fact, it's the combination of all those that provides a single source of truth on where all your data is at, where all your machines are at. Have they all been patched? Like Matt was saying something about just do the simplest things. Being able to keep all of your devices up to date is super important. And I know it's cheeky to say, well, just go patch everything. And I don't mean just go patch everything. I mean, if you're going to patch everything, make sure you know what everything is, right? Start at the lowest levels and then merge your teams. I can't stress that enough. There needs to be a convergence in this industry of IT security and IT operations as one large organization and not be siloed and segmented off the way they typically are today. So we can encourage cross communication. We can encourage groups of people merging their data and their inventories together, right? So then we could get a true view of how the organization operates today and where all those assets sit.
Okay, and talking about assets and in a more consultative way, how can organizations identify if all their assets are managed correctly or if they are in risk at their organizations?
I think that where I would jump in there is how frequently do you have data on each one of those systems? Okay, I'll give you an example. I used to work for an endpoint security vendor, okay? And while you have a machine that maybe has been through your Active Directory, right, has been through your Cisco or Palo Alto firewalls, has been patched by your patching system, but they don't have, they haven't checked in with your endpoint security system in 3 days, but it's been through all those other sources. How do we know, right? We used to, the last endpoint company I worked for, it was always a question of, is it offline or did the agent get uninstalled? And how would anyone know that if they weren't matching the data? If I was the endpoint management person, I would look at that and say, oh, I think that machine's on vacation or it's offline or it's not here, so I don't need to worry about it. When in fact, it's been through the network in the last 22 minutes. That's really important to understand. And vice versa. How many machines have been deployed that have some components of our security program, but don't have all of them, right? How do you merge the idea of asset and asset from a physical perspective or a virtual perspective, laptop, desktop, server, virtual, and mobile? And how does each one of those interact together? Because in today's internet connected world, connecting to like a Google Docs or Google Office type environment or Office 365 from Microsoft or one of these Office suites, they don't just matter from the computer that you have inside your four walls, because those walls has completely dissolved. And since they've completely dissolved, they're being, in fact, many times, unless I'm doing things like this, I don't even use my laptop anymore. I almost work exclusively from my mobile device because it's enabled to do so. Do we know where all those are at? And do we know who's using them, and should they be?
I'll add to what Richard was saying. I think fundamentally, if you to actually do asset inventory well, you need to have kind of the two following, some apparently contradictory but actually complementary ideas. Plus, one, you need to have a single source of truth for a heterogeneous mix of different kinds of assets. At a minimum, users and infrastructure, and you have to accept the two following things. One, no such database tends to exist except in the most sophisticated, largest funded organizations that tend to be $1 trillion US companies. But if you want to get there, two things need to be case. One, you need to start a program with that. And it is actually about constant improvement, because there will never be a perfectly accurate static database of these things. And that's what everybody wants, because that's low cost and it's one place to go. But it's actually something that will continuously be updated and will actually continuously show that there are deltas or even errors. Say, a new system was spun up, we know about it, we don't know everything, and we need to develop effectively practices and then partner with vendors that can attack part of that slice to say, okay, how do we actually have a comprehensive plan to address where our assets are? We have easy ways and highly automated ways to say, oh, we just acquired a company. Let's do a few basics. Let's integrate with their Active Directory so that we can see what users are present. Let's see if anyone is accessing the system that's not in this user database, because if so, then there'll be a bunch of follow-up actions that we take to basically improve the quality of this database. But it is both never going to be perfect, but it will be increasingly high quality over time. And those are the things that you need to do, because if you really don't know about something, you can't protect it. So that's phase one, is you actually do need a program around an asset single source of truth. The second one is actually a concept that we call blast radius, which is this idea of, okay, if we know very well where our core items are, then what actually is the consequence of something going awry, an exploit somewhere, some sort of malicious actor gaining access somewhere else. And you can kind of play this two-step game of one, try to understand everything you have, and it will not be perfect and it will take time and people over time. But then also for our most critical assets, let's actually understand kind of, what interacts with them, and you kind of build out shells and defense in depth, and you say, okay, if something goes wrong at a given place, how much does that affect us? Do we have ways to very quickly lock that down? And that by combining both of those, one, you do get comprehensive visibility over your organization to kind of do the basics. But as you're doing that, you can also put in place various policies that are going to be inherently more restrictive over your most important systems that actually say, we don't know everything that's interacting with the world. Therefore, we need to be more security conscious the closer you get to something of value. And again, this takes the kind of look of only highly authenticated users with multi-factor can even access systems that themselves access something very important. And you build up policies that way on both sides to actually say the only things that can access increasingly sensitive, increasingly important assets, increasingly must be known, good, and up to date. And if you do that, one, that's actually a good forcing function to find out where all the people that probably need access to those systems, but did not have things that were known, good, up to date, will show up. And security has to be empowered to actually make those calls, which will in some cases block people. But those kind of small inconveniences up front are massively outweighed by the benefits and the protections that they actually provide on an ongoing basis.
Actually, Matt, I want to jump in on that real quick, because that notion right there is actually huge, because the inverse is true, right? If you can apply that type of control, right, and that type of discipline and diligence to your most trusted assets, right, and put requirements in, it also allows you to capture and understand the opposite, which is what systems, what users, and what activities in the organization you need to allow it a little bit more freedom. Now, freedom does not mean wild, wild west, let them do whatever they want. But many times in security programs, I have seen on both sides of the fence, back when I was on the customer, the industry side, and then in the vendor side, is that people will do kind of an all-in-one approach. The compliance initiative says I have to do this, so I I'm very firm about how I apply security. When there are times when items have high velocity or high value to your company, because you need to have freedom, you need to allow them to have velocity across the network. You need to allow them to be creative, while not because the item is actually low risk. And identifying risk is huge, because you can then not be the people that say no to all of the connections, and you can actually tie yourself to the goals of the organization from a risk perspective, from a revenue perspective, from a business perspective, so that you are enabling business where you can, and then protecting the most secure items. But do the inverse as well. Encourage where you can with low risk, and think about how you can reduce friction where necessary, and then increase friction for the right reasons.
Thank you, Matt and Rich. Now, talking about the global changes that the pandemic has left us, what's your advice for people-centric security for remote workers, which has become increasingly important?
I will say, first off, it's good to have a baseline of these. So when we were working with our customers that are government agencies, large Fortune 500 organizations, when the pandemic started, quite frankly, everyone was solely about just trying to enable as much capacity as possible, and we kind of had to cross our fingers. So I had as many customers as possible saying, we're going to hope that our VPNs work, and we have agents mostly deployed, and that's going to take us the next 6 months. It's now almost 18 months later. Hopefully we'll see kind of like a large into the pandemic soon, but at the same time, remote work is here to stay. And the things that we've looked at are a few things. One, similar to kind of mobile devices and a lot of others, we're moving in an area where much of the value that your organization is going to create, and also much of the access to valuable parts of your organization, is going to occur from areas security has never, both one, had to worry about historically, and two, has very little insight and experience working with, because all of a sudden everyone's home network is as if it's a branch office now. So the best analogy we say is that if you wanted to take the kind of, both older and even current methods, then for an organization with 25,000 people, congratulations, you now have 25,000 branch offices. Clearly, some things can work in this environment, but the old ways of doing business are not entirely going to work. So I think there are a few basics that start off there, but the real answer is we're still figuring this out. So you should absolutely have some kind of management software on every device that you give an employee to understand what's going on. You should also have some kind of secure communications gear that's going on. I think the keys along with that are to understand what parts of the new branch office are there. A lot of marketing dollars are going to be spent saying they have some zero trust solution for the home to varying degrees, which is usually just recasting their old existing product with the buzzword. But for us at Palo Alto Networks, at least, I think the key is there are certain unique aspects about working from home perpetually that security has yet to address, especially around being in a much more hostile permanent environment on a local network. And that's where we say it kind of starts with have secure communications, be it some kind of VPN or secure connectivity. Definitely manage all the assets you have at home, but then there are a number of other items to actually have the assets that are corporate assets at home actually understand the risk profile of that environment, have security do so in a way that is privacy preserving, but also actionable for people to say, what are the risks at home? And what we're seeing with some of our customers is, especially for sensitive departments, actually deploying specific IT, enterprise IT security managed network equipment to the office of, at the very least, sensitive employees, so people in finance, people in legal, executives. And then the key with all of this is previously that kind of blast radius conversation, because it's actually key to understand where is data and risk actually deployed at work from home. So, would you rather protect the senior director of finance or actually the executive assistant to the CEO. Ideally, you'd want both, but if you have to choose, the executive assistant to the CEO likely sees much more sensitive information than a senior director of finance, because even though he or she, by policy, would not be considered very high up, by the amount of information that flows through his or her systems, it's almost everything that goes to the CEO and should be protected. And I think that's the one, is understanding where that data is and where that value is going for people as we build that out. So you can double click on a lot of that, but I also want to give Richard some time to respond to this as well.
Yeah, actually, I think the only thing, Matt, I would add is you brought up the excellent point, right? We move people to home, and they are now conducting your business on consumer grade networks, on consumer grade networking gear. And any of us who have gone to Black Hat or DEF CON, every year for the last 10 or 20, there will be a talk or a demonstration example of some hacker showing off how they broke into the latest, most popular home networking equipment. And they did it fairly easily. Okay. Having the either software connected or not connected controls, it's really hard to scale hardware to the entire org. Risk, the risk-based discussion that Matt was bringing up is excellent, but also don't fall into the trap of positions, right, and or salary, not salary, depending on how people get paid, denote their level of importance. Because Matt just brings up the greatest example: the CEO's admin, someone who works in an environment where they manage systems that are worth, they are the crown jewel of the organization, but they sit at a grade level that you think is maybe not as important or is important, but that person is in the environment all the time. I actually did a case one time where a system admin was on his, oddly enough, his server at home where he was hosting web services as a side business. He was using that machine to SSH into the organization to manage their entire server cluster. Imagine, and the attacker rode the wave in, right? And that allowed, and they thought, well, he's just an admin. We don't really have to, secure him like we do the CIO. We probably have to secure that person more, right? And bring access. So Matt, you hit all the right parts. I probably just messed about half of it up, dropping in there, but it's really good points.
Well, I'll add one more thing, which is it's apparent we are used to having assets operate temporarily in hostile environments. Be that we're used to having, all of our sales force, even our executives, go and temporarily need to connect from Wi-Fi on an airplane, or sometimes connect from a hotel or places like that. But there are two main differences with this new paradigm. One, you're not just connecting for a few hours at a time, you're actually going to be connecting for years. In some cases, the duration of employment. And the second one is you're going to have, it's much more predictable. So that previously attackers can do kind of various pre-position attacks. There are things called watering holes, where you might say, okay, I'm going to try to hack the Wi-Fi at a local Starbucks and kind of see who's going to come by. But the problem is that's not targeted. It's somewhat opportunistic. It comes at random. You are now actually going to be able to legitimately and unfortunately target homes of individuals, knowing that that's actually their office. And that is an entirely different level of risk, simply because attackers will start to realize that they can have disproportionate influence attacking consumer grade systems that are, as unfortunately, as Richard said, and he's exactly right, extremely easy to break into, in some cases actually easy to break into remotely. And that we actually view that as kind of the next wave, and getting ahead of that is actually kind of securing and disconnecting as much as possible the work that gets done at home from really anything associated with the consumer side of what happens in the home. And unfortunately, we view that just as a matter of time more than anything.
Yeah, I would add to that, the last thing, I know we got to get to questions. On the home front, where data is located, right? Printers, file shares at home, people, they still do, air backup via, some sort of automatic system to a drive at the house, or they have a thumb drive they back up their data to. Where is your data living? Because in the normal corporate environment, they probably aren't using that, or they don't have the ability to keep that in their house. So.
Okay, I don't know, maybe we can go through the questions. Is that okay, Fauri?
Yes, perfect. We can move on to the Q&A session right now. And just to remind everyone that you can ask your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And you can ask whether in English or in Spanish, and we will translate them. So we already have 3 questions. The first one is, can employees take the initiative, or is their home office security entirely up to the IT area of their company?
So I'll say, I think there are very good best practices employees can take, but unfortunately, I think for most people, it will not be sufficient. So I think there are a few good things, but even something as simple as updating a home router to the most recent of firmware would be a great step to take. Trying to convince all employees across all departments to do so, I think the training burden for that is going to be huge. So while it's a great step, there should be some resources for that. I don't think that that's actually a strategy, and I think that the gaps that we would have, unless we can have the ability to measure it, you can do a training program around that, but unless you're actually able to measure the effectiveness of it, I don't think it's going to be particularly great. And unfortunately, many of the least technology savvy employees tend to be in the most sensitive positions. So we actually did this for some customers because we were actually finding not only consumer grade routers that were out of date across the employees of very large people working from home, but actually their home routers would expose on the public internet vulnerable interfaces. And what our research found kind of early on in the pandemic was about 5 to 7% of employees just have a home network that is remotely exploitable by anyone anywhere in the world. There's a lot of challenges with that. The real problem is actually their ISPs. So about 5 to 7% of all consumer grade ISPs will insecurely give out consumer hardware. It's not something the employee can necessarily change because it's owned by the ISP. Coaching people through those conversations becomes difficult. So it's great to have kind of general hygiene of things and people and what you should and shouldn't be doing with work equipment at home. But at the same time, I don't think it's actually a large solution, because even if you have 70% success rate, you're still going to have 30% of the holes. And the main problem in a lot of these cases is not what is just on that employee's laptop that somebody could exploit. It's the fact that from one employee's laptop, they will get credentials to other sensitive systems that have much wider span. And going back to that concept of blast radius, it really is about the enterprise systems, these systems access, not just the data on the laptop itself. And with that, you need to have a more holistic program. So is it a start? Yes. Do I think it's actually going to materially improve things? I would love to think so. And if we could measure it, I think that would be a really exciting experiment. But I think the main problem is going to be both measurement, and my own bias would be inability of most people to actually do it, because most people unfortunately cannot even update their computers, much less something like a router or other things. So there's some good awareness training there, but I don't think that's actually part of a solution, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think awareness and encouraging. There will be employees who are a little bit more tech savvy, or they care a little bit more about other things, and those doesn't mean the other people don't care. They might take the initiative to do some stuff, and you want to be able to encourage that, but you don't want to also delegate your entire security program off to someone else who is not as educated or is as aware of the risk and posture of the organization, right? You need to take an active role in that.
Thank you. Then we have another one, which is, how does moving to the cloud outpace the ability for security teams to keep track of assets and protect them? How can we improve protecting them?
So it is explosive, right? The whole, dissolving of the firewall thing, right? But remember, we've done this for 10, 15, 20 years. We have employees in each one of our organizations who are already set up to be remote employees, okay? Many of those, whether it's a sales team or an engineering team or somebody out in the world, we've already provided them the ability to connect remotely or gain access to, SaaS resources or, cloud-based resources. It's identifying who is an office-based employee versus who is already enabled to be remote capable. But the explosion, I wouldn't say, while it certainly is game-changing and the walls have dissolved, the controls don't have to have, right? You need to be able to still identify the assets, and the assets is not just the machine. It's the humans. What do the humans need to connect to? And what have you provided their ability to connect to it? You can set policies in each one of those. If I think about things like Microsoft Intune or Office 365 or Google Workspaces, right? You need to still grant access to those. You still need to know what computers, what people, what humans are setting up to those, what their permissions are, and how they have access. How do you grant it and revoke it, right? So it does, the move to the cloud doesn't automatically mean it's the wild, wild west. It does mean that you need to give the same care and level of due diligence to your on-premise resources as you do to the cloud-based resources.
I would add that I think on-prem allowed, it comes from an era where things were expensive and there weren't that many of them in terms of assets. And in that regime, it actually allowed us to take a lot of shortcuts to get kind of what we thought was good enough security. In particular, I know very few data center operators that actually track all of the assets they have. They instead have a firewall on ingress and egress, and they kind of consider that good enough to watch where it's going through a kind of a gate rather than actually tracking what's going on. You actually can set up your clouds that way. It's just that it is going to be enforced in software. So, and it's more that what we see is that teams moving to the cloud. It's not that the cloud is unable to do those things. It is actually just, it is less familiar. So, to a large degree, going to the cloud offers a lot of opportunities. Everything is in software. Everything's actually available there. We actually see two primary issues with this across our customer base. One is just kind of a lack of familiarity, though at this point, customers are getting much more familiar. They're very good consultancies. There's very good training on kind of how to do things, but it's going to be different than in a data center. The other side is actually, as Richard was saying, it's actually much more ironically about and I mean this in a specific way, purchase controls. It's different than cost controls, but actually purchase controls. When we ask most customers, do you have a plan for the cloud? They say, yes, we're in Amazon and maybe Google or Azure as a second one. What we find is on average, they're actually in 13 different cloud providers. They just didn't know about it because they have a regional manager somewhere that's going to a regional ISP. Their people in Europe are in OVH and Orange. Their Malaysian general manager set something up with the local state-owned ISP as part of a deal. And they actually don't know about those because cloud security systems are blind to only what they're talking about. In some cases, even if they're in AWS, they may have other people set up effectively unsanctioned different AWS accounts, which AWS will treat as if they're a different customer and provide no visibility. And that actually figuring that as a combination of going through their log files, actually going through purchasing receipts, and actually seeing who is billing AWS to P cards on the company that's not authorized through central provisioning. But I think it's actually a very large opportunity because everything can be much more automated in the cloud. The problem is, again, having kind of the discipline and then also getting the organizational buy-in to actually put up certain blocks that say if you deploy something to the cloud, it actually has to be in our VPC this way so that our security controls apply, because unfortunately, otherwise, anyone now with a purchasing card is a systems administrator if they want to be, which is a different environment. And there's thankfully a few ways to help enforce that. But to me, that's the main problem with the cloud. It's not inherently better or worse than data centers. It's just different.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so we will choose one last question. And here they're asking, how do you sell to upper management that cybersecurity investment is necessary?
So I think the simplest answer that I would give is you tie the efforts of your cybersecurity effort needs to be tied to the goals of the organization. What does the board, the CEO, the CFO find most valuable? And what do they think is important? I'll give you an example. I worked for an organization one time where I thought, because we were a Visa, PCI related vendor, right, or a company, we had to do all this work around PCI, which was really, really important to a retailer. But my CEO, my CFO actually felt that the bigger value was in protecting their intellectual property about how they source and price their goods. Right? If I solely went to them and only talked about PCI because we had to be compliant, this is what the industry told me, versus if I told them I could protect that really sensitive gold that they say is the most important thing, it's easier to sell when it's tied to the goal of the organization and what they want to achieve, rather than just be security.
Great advice.
Yes. I would, I completely agree. I think that security is best when it is an enabler of means and a partner on ends. and which exactly goes to what Richard's saying. If you can align on what executives actually care about, you will get great investment in there. And it's actually being able to tie it to what are the crown jewels, and then having security investments be derivative from those. And again, I think most of the disconnect is both, I think it's largely communication, but in some cases it's actually misaligned goals of what are we actually trying to protect and what do we care about. And I think it is a much better place to start for aligning around executives' goals and ends. Then later, when you have credibility, you can actually bring up other things that they might not have thought of, but could still be important. For example, a ransomware attack on your organization stopping work for everyone for days is actually not something that executives that without a background would think of. But as soon as you frame this as a technology has brought us a lot of benefits, there are certain risks that would actually freeze the company for 5 days. They will very much recognize the fact that the company should operate as a pretty important goal and to have mitigations in place for that. But if you just jump to a technical solution or say, like, we can't be vulnerable to ransomware, there's kind of a communications gap because they haven't internalized the business objective, which is not ransomware. It is business should not be interrupted. And a lot of it is being able to frame things in that way to those executive audiences.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, and Matt is absolutely spot on, right? Think about your peers in your organization. You're either the person that heads up marketing, the person that heads up logistics, the person that heads up facilities, the person that heads up accounts receivable and finance department. They are all working toward the common organizational goal. The marketing person does not create marketing because they think it's grand, or they think we only need to be in web advertising and TV, right? They're doing the type of campaigns, the social, all that stuff, because it drives the end goal of the organization. We need to more align ourselves. Security gets kind of pigeonholed into, well, we have to run the hard and fast to be the no guys. We don't have to be, right? Just like marketing, just like logistics, just like everyone else, we can enable the organization, and we need to start thinking along those lines as those business leaders do as well.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we are done for today. So I just want to thank our speakers, our moderators, and thank you, Mau, Carlos, for making this possible.
Well, thank you everybody for attending. We're looking forward for the next modules as well. Matt, thank you so much. Richard, thank you so much. I think that the insights are amazing. I think Latin America needs advice and perspectives like the ones you're seeing around the world. So this is great, and I love the last pieces of advice, like what do people really need to think about? And I love the idea of this. This is an enablement thing. I mean, cybersecurity should not be thought as like, oh, this is the bad guys. No, it's the opposite. No, if we want to think about innovation, if we want to think about different things, it's just an enablement to make sure that the businesses keep going forward. So thank you so much. Thank you, Carlos, for the support as always from HSBC. And we look forward to having the next modules on this.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Gracias, Carlos.
Thank you, everyone. Just to highlight, tomorrow we will have another fantastic session talking about the new cybersecurity kill chain with Antonio Imperial, the CISO from Metabase Q, Josh Tweddle from CrowdStrike Latam, and Nostock Flores from HSBC. And we received a lot of questions today, which we will be compiling to address all of these queries along the seminar. So thank you, everyone, for the attendance. Thank you, Mauricio, and thank you, Matt and Rich.
Thank you so much.
Gracias,
Thank you.
Majo. Bye.